here hosting this this panel because we see a lot of value in the future of messaging. As messaging evolves, we have to evolve with it and to grow with it, because we want to continue to give you the ability to control the message that you send. So I guess at this time I want to hand it over to Nicolas Kouchkovsky, who is the former CMO of Genesis and the founder of CaCube, who's our moderator for the evening. So thank you all.
Thank you. So it looks like there's a very formal protocol. I'm supposed to invite. I'm going to sit there. Hope it's okay if it's not as protocol
It's fine.
we thought it would be. So it's my great pleasure to have you. So I'm going to take my cheat sheet and invite you. Dee Anna, maybe you want to join me? So Dee Anna is SVP of Marketing for Movable Ink. So it's a platform that focuses on bringing visual content for all the marketing channels. I think we actually can push the stool there. No, you stay close to me. But anyway, before she headed marketing for both Yammer and later Hootsuite. So in the social space. Then we have Jerry, so we're going to have female, male, perfect. I don't know who put this. So Jerry Kupsh is the former director of new product at Verizon. He's now advising companies in both the wireless and messaging space for both product and go-to-market strategies. After talking briefly with him, I think actually his true profession is to be a coach for the high school running team. And this is where you start to see the eyes lit and the passions come. But I think you have a thing or two to say about messaging.
Yes, I do.
So Vanessa?
Yeah.
Vanessa Thompson is in charge of all customer program for IoT at Twilio. So she's in charge of marketing, she's in charge of partnerships. Before she works at Blue Wolf, I think now it's part of IBM, very much focused on customer experience programs. And she was before an analyst at IDC. And finally we have Anand Chandrasekaran, who at Facebook manages the messenger platform and product partnerships. So he's also an angel investor and advisor to several startups. And before, he has been a chief product officer in many companies, ranging from startup all the way to Bharti Airtel, that I think most of you should know is a huge, it's almost a conglomerate in India. So this is a wonderful panel, so thank you for assembling it. So I've introduced you guys. Maybe to start with, you can tell us what's your relationship with messaging, what makes you feel so passionate about it, and more importantly, why this group should care about it. What is this becoming so important? You want to start?
Sure. So I'm the marketer on the panel. And, so I think about messaging as a channel, it's a way to connect and engage with consumers. I think why I'm passionate about it is because I'm a mom of a middle schooler, and it's like the one way that I can actually get him to be excited about like communicating with me. So, but seriously, like looking at him and his group of friends. I mean, forget social. They don't care about social. There's no way they're going to email. They don't talk on the phone. It's all about messaging. So I think it's a a very important channel as a marketer. It's something that we've got to embrace for the future.
So yeah, I was at Verizon for 27 years, so it sounds kind of like a sentence or something. Fantastic.
It's okay.
It was quite amazing. Right out of college, they picked me up, and I started out in merger and acquisitions, and made some trips over to Europe where messaging was big, and said, there's something here. This is going to work in the U.S. And people were telling me in Europe that or in the US, messaging will never work here. People are going to make calls, the screens are too small, you can't send text messages. And I used to hear analysts saying messaging will never work here. We drive cars, the only reason people would use text messaging is if you're in a subway. And so forth, because that's what you have down, you can't text and drive. So I heard that, and when I saw that, I said, this is where I want to be. And people thought I was crazy because I basically spent most of my time over the last 20 years developing messaging, all, you know, from every service, from SMS, MMS, advanced messaging. I also worked on NFL Mobile, you know, the app for Verizon, many other apps that I worked on, but I always wanted to work on messaging and led a team. And for me, it was a rewarding experience to see it go to, you know, the hundreds of millions of dollars or hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue that was generated from these services that I made. And so the reason I'm passionate about it is I have seen that messaging, you know, I know a lot about messaging, and it is the thing that's it's the mobile OS on the device. So, you know, people are in app overload right now. And what that means is if you see somebody's phone, they have like 10,000 apps on their phone. Every business wants you to download an app. And think about, like, you go to Chipotle, you go to McDonald's. If you get all their apps, you can't find them, and you don't have enough memory on your phone. And you got to upgrade to the next phone. Apple keeps having to come out with a terabyte phone to support it. So really, this is the portal that's there for communication. It now goes beyond person to person, and it goes into the business segment. So it's a very interesting space. And, you know, people keep saying that, oh, messaging is, I've heard, you know, when I started on text, the first thing I said is, well, you're never going to be big. You have AOL IM is going to be much bigger than you. You know, you got AOL is much bigger. And we went and tried to partner with the AOL, and, you know, and then I heard, oh, the BlackBerry's coming out, they're going to have a full keyboard, email's going to take you over. And so every year it was a new product that was going to take over messaging. And now I think people think, okay, messaging may be here for a little while.
Thanks,
What do you, Vanessa?
Sure. So what's interesting to me about messaging is just fundamentally it's all about relationships. So I spent many years at IDC, and I say many, but as an industry analyst for 6 years, following the relationship between people and applications. So collaboration, communities, enterprise social. That's where I first met Dee Anna at Yammer. And I think relationships are what underpins how we communicate, all of the things that make up our relationships. And essentially it's about communicating in a personal way. It's about interacting with brands and businesses and other friends, family, consumers, and you interact with all of those people and things in different ways. And so you made a comment about like people to businesses or applications. And one of the things that fascinates me is like the future of how we're going to be communicating. And that's why I joined Twilio to look at the IoT business, because Twilio is, if you don't know Twilio, fundamentally a communications company. But over time, we're going to need to communicate with things. And so how do our relationships and how we communicate with all of these different contexts, so right context, right time, like all of these channels, like everything that's associated to messaging, how does it then relate in the future to connecting with things? And so it becomes people to applications to things, right? So yeah, that's kind of the future of messaging, and how we get there is fundamentally interesting to me. But yeah, I'm just really happy to be here.
Hi. The advantage of going last is that most of what you want to say has been already said. But I'll say two things that I think complement everything that's been said, which I fully agree with. One, I think one of the things that I'm really passionate about messaging about is that it's truly one-on-one. I think it's a truly intimate medium. If you post on any other forums, you're really communicating one-to-many, one to a group. You're not particularly aiming the message at one person, but as messaging, truly you're aiming it at one person. And so that means that you can personalize the message for that person or for that audience. But by the same token, if you send the wrong message, it's like 100% wrong because it's only intended for one person. And so it's not like any other media where you send it to 100 people and 2 people didn't like it, but you still got it right 98% of the time. And so I think that is sort of the underlying insight that I think offers up all the advantages or disadvantages of messaging. And so one thing that we did at Messenger was that inherently, because of that one-to-one communication, it's got to be two-way opt-in, and both people or both parties or all the parties in the case of group messaging have to have opted into the conversation. Like someone shouldn't be calling them just because they got permission through some other means. And so I think the bar for messaging is really high compared to some of the other modes of kind of engagement. The other thing I would say is inherently today, and this might be not news to some of the folks here, that there are problems that we're solving today as kind of synchronous communication problems that are really messaging and asynchronous problems. The biggest one being customer care. Anything from pinging a local cake shop to say, hey, can I pick up my cake? What time can I come by? All the way to, if you're calling Comcast, to kind of ask a question about your account and everything in between. We do this today primarily, we call a 1-800 number, a very, very, very small number of people email the brand, but primarily people still call. And it is structurally just something that nobody wants to do. The customer does not want to call the brand does not want to get this call. And actually, me as a consumer, I'm okay with a response coming to me a couple of hours later. I don't really need a response right away. And so if I hear like 2 hours from now that something that I didn't want on my bill has been removed, I'm okay with that. I don't need it to happen right now. And so it's the classic asynchronous communication problem, which today is solved as a synchronous communication problem, which is you need to talk to each other, which is like inefficient for both parties. And so my big belief is that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, just like if you need to tell someone you're 10 minutes away, you don't need to pick up the phone and call them and say I'm 10 minutes away. You can just message them and they know everything there is to know. That's going to happen between people and businesses as well. And by that token, if a business sends a message that's a mistake, they may want to take it back, or they may want to indicate that it's a mistake or that something has changed, and so on and so forth. So I think messaging, to Jerry's point, I think is, I believe strongly too that it's kind of here to stay.
So there is this notion of platform as a service, and maybe my first question is, what does it exactly mean, and why we should be looking at messaging? And you all are very passionate about it. Why we should look at messaging as a platform? So maybe Vanessa, you want to probably have an opinion or two.
I think we all have an opinion. But I wouldn't say platform as a service because that gets us into more of the technology and structure. But I think everyone has a different view or a different flavor upon which we look at the messaging construct. But I think fundamentally, like if we talk about the platform, it's really the features that are enabled by different channels at which you reach somebody. So Messenger is the channel, but fundamentally it's I'm sending a asynchronous message, and that the messaging component of it is visible through all of the other ways that you reach, whether it's SMS, whether it's WhatsApp or Messenger or any of these other channels, right? So I think that's that sort of foundational knowledge is extremely important for us to all make sure that we understand, because everyone has a different opinion, like all of us on the panel here, about what is important to you. So like maybe somebody does actually want to know that their bill has been credited right now because it's super important to them, but the rest of us don't need to know right now. So it's kind of that combination of you can deliver these things as part of the foundational experience, that ultimately it's up to the time, the context, like how important is it to you? There are so many factors that go into like what differentiates the channel and ultimately the experience that's generated from it. That's kind of my idea of the messaging as a platform. Yeah.
I'll add one thought to this. So one thing that I think is going to be a reality soon, I mean, especially in the world of driverless cars, which is predicted by the end of the year that there will be a driverless car hailing service. I think this idea of things being part of what you message to, I think is very interesting. In a world where a car is driving around, who's going to message you saying I'm 10 minutes away?
Right.
The car has to message itself saying that I'm 10 minutes away.
Yeah.
And so I think this idea of the car will acquire a personality, and kind of if you keep the car waiting for 15 minutes, the car will get a little bit annoyed. Is not too out of the realm of possibility, where I think Jerry was talking about all the devices in his house being wired up.
Yeah.
So I think between the home and the car and so on, it's not that hard to imagine that these things become part of a platform, and then there are tools that sort of indicate a way of communication to your point, like there is a certain ethos within WhatsApp, there's a certain ethos within Messenger, there's a certain ethos within WeChat, and you want these devices to not be disrespectful to that ethos.
Yeah.
But and so you don't want to be too loud, you don't want to be too soft. There's a certain for instance, WeChat and China, there are no spam laws, and so if you send a message every day, that's normal. If they don't hear from you regularly, they think it's actually there's something wrong with your service. Whereas in the States, like if you haven't gotten permission, it's both legally as well as morally kind of not a nice thing to do. So I think this combination of IoT, meeting, messaging platforms, I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, and I'd love to add to this because the whole driverless car scenario, or even just your electric car today, like how it communicates with a charging station and all of the data that goes through the car. So your average Tesla every month is consuming around 9 gigabytes of data. And so when it's communicating with the charging station, which is also connected, there's so much data that can be analyzed so to tell you, hey, I'm going to be at the charging station in 15 minutes, or your car is sending you a notification, or it's getting angry at you saying like, I need to be charged right now. And like that's actually the level of communication. But ultimately these things make up a very analogous view to what we would have seen in the social networking side, right? So like your network is essentially a reflection of who you connect with most regularly and all of these things, but essentially your things are going to start to build up these profiles or essentially a personality of how they interact with other things. And if you think about even the extension beyond that, which is a thing as a customer, because it has all of this data about its personality, it may be able to transact on your behalf. Like it may just take you to the charging station, charge up, and then maybe it knows that I'm a Dunkin' Donuts regular, so it's going to take me there next, right? So there are all of these things that essentially change the dynamics of not only your interaction with the thing, but also the whole supply chain. Because if you think about you communicating directly with the thing, then it cuts out a whole bunch of other people that were in the supply chain before, or that had to be in the messaging path.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really, really fascinating thing to explore, just as a thought. I won't expand on it, but yeah.
So we spoke about the blunt and unsophisticated nature, potential nature of the messaging communication. How about AI? So what is AI going to make what is the impact of AI and how we should look at leveraging AI for messaging communication?
So let me go back to the messaging as a platform, back to that.
Yeah.
So it's just a natural thing. When you talk to the millennials and even the younger than the millennials generations, they all think that you can text any landline number, any business. It's just a natural, and when they find out you can't, they start asking, why can't I, with that. And it makes sense for the businesses to enable messaging on their platform because they don't want to fill up their call centers with AI, to drive into your AI, things that could be automated with bots, things that, simple questions and customer service things that could be handled without a customer service rep involvement. So I think that's one of the ways it'll start. But, if you, and the millennials like things categorized by, I learned this in my cross-country coach experience working with the younger generation. If you want to get like a weak response from them, or it takes a week, do it email. They don't check email. The millennials it's not what they do. Checking email, it's not, but if you send a message, if I have an event that practice is canceled due to the smog or we're going to the local gym, you send them a text.
Stop looking at me when you think about all the things, it's very embarrassing.
I didn't mean to, I'm sorry. So AI, I think a natural first place for it is to automate some of these messaging as an application type platforms.
And I'll kind of build on that. I think from a marketer standpoint, we have focused so much on gathering all this information about the consumer. And you might use AI to do like predictive segmentation. But we haven't thought enough about, what is that content? Like, how do we connect with that consumer? And in messaging, it is that very intimate channel. So your message to them has to be incredibly personalized, individualized. And so at Movable Ink, we're really focused, our AI team in the labs is focused on developing, leveraging technology that helps marketers understand what specific aspects of the content resonates with the consumer. So it's that visual content, not just the messaging, but what aspect of the image really resonates with the consumer. And then how do you personalize that so that it does resonate to that Gen Z that is all about visual content. I think they only communicate using images and emoji. So that's one of the ways that we're focused on is taking AI and using it to help brands improve the way they're using messaging.
I don't know how you're doing questions, if Nicolas, your preference.
Well,
if you
I think we
interactive,
can be
you wanna-
flexible.
Yeah, but I do want to ask, as a follow-on to that, in the context of customer service, do you see a world where we're going neural with messaging? So there is some kind of AI engagement that remembers that you called and you have these services. Let's say you're Comcast. The customer has these 4 services and they called this time about that service. Do you see that in the context of messaging in terms of the neural learning about a given customer?
So I started to feel very embarrassed. So I was the email guy, now I'm the Comcast guy. I thought I was behaving. So allow me to deflect that question to my panelists. Who wants to take this one?
So I actually in my time at Messenger worked really closely with Comcast. One thing that was surprising was about 1 in 4 people were calling to just ask for their balance, which is not surprising at all. So they were literally calling, going through the whole kind of press 1 for this, press 2 for that, hold times, what's your account number, et cetera, to then say, can you tell me like what's my when is my balance due and what's my bill? And they'd be like, you have an app, you have a website, you have you could ask this question over email. And actually, they were not going to do anything with it right then. So, like calling the agent was literally the most expensive and least productive way to solve that problem. Right. And so it's actually like once you triage through those things, there are some interesting use cases. Like for instance, a lot of people feel like I don't need to pay $100 or $80 or whatever to get a tech to come and install my modem. So there's something called a self-install kit, which so Comcast gets like 70 million calls a day. Of those, 12 million calls are about the self-install kit. People thought they could do it themselves, and then they realized they couldn't, and they call. And they're like, "Can you tell me step one, step two?" And actually, walking them through all those steps offline is the best way to solve it, because their hands are free and they can still like assemble the modem. And there's like videos that get sent, and they could click on the video, and then it just literally walks them through what to do. So being on the phone is literally the worst way to solve that problem as well. So they literally went through like the percentage of people who call for a problem and then the best solution. And communicating asynchronously was literally the best way to solve most problems. There are some situations, like for instance, if you want to know if there's an outage right now, and therefore I don't need to do anything to fix my modem because there's bad weather or cable's broken. That's probably a scenario where calling makes a ton of sense, but that's less than 10% of the calls that come in. And so it's literally like such an inefficient way of doing it. And it's back to, people who call are used to landlines. And that's the way they've called customer care for like 30, 40, 50 years. So they still continue to do that.
But even in that context, what you just gave about the outage, it's easy on an app or online.
Yeah.
Just say we got an outage. We're
Yeah.
notifying you.
Well, it might be region specific.
But I mean, that's the point. You've
Yeah.
got AI, you've got neural, they know who you are.
Yeah.
They can ping you with a message.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think
say, "We got an outage
the
for
one thing I'll say about AI, so we worked on an agent called M within Messenger, which that used AI to surface up birthdays and gift reminders and stuff like that. The one thing I'll say about AI is framing the problem correctly is very important with AI, because people will only accept so many false negatives before they give up on the experience altogether. You don't want to be kind of like over aggressive. Our product managers would say, "Look, like I found one more birthday, let me surface it. And I know this is the guy's brother, and very likely that'll be a very relevant message to send. But if I'm not close to my brother, the fact that you discover this is my brother and it's his birthday and you send me a message is completely useless. But if you maybe say, hey, here's 3 people that you used to be really in touch with last year around Thanksgiving, and it's like Thanksgiving again, and we noticed you haven't messaged these people at all, that might be an interesting way to surface. It's kind of the same classifier. You're detecting that someone's important to me, you're detecting that I had some last communication that made them important, and then you're surfacing that I should probably reach out. But this might be a smart way to surface it. And I used that service a lot. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember like we were on this trip last year and we were like on a road trip and we were coordinating it or whatever. And I would just message and say, hey, like that was fun last year. And so it was a win for me, it was a win for the other person, and it was a win for Messenger. And so I think the key is that AI is still used to solve meaningful consumer problems, as opposed to AI is like its own thing.
So I'd like to continue on that theme, and what you all have been trying AI, so what would be your word of advice or recommendation in terms of balancing automation with AI with something that is human? And you all convey a sense that messaging is extremely personal and human. So how do you strike that balance and make the best of the two?
I think what you need to do is kind of break it up into small tasks and not be overly aggressive. I think AI has been oversold for many years, and it's been told that it can do anything for you. But when you break it up into specific skills and use cases and kind of build on those use cases over time, I think that's the way you do it. And it takes a lot of training from the users too, so starting out and building those use cases over time. And also having an open, no one company can do all this, so it takes a kind of a collaboration of companies working together to develop the skills. So there's plenty of opportunities. It can't be one company developing it. Maybe they can do the framework, that other companies can help build those skills, and I think the power of the developer community can really work out here.
Yeah, I would agree on the power of the developer community by contributing to models and just ontologies and all of the things that are really important to you and something that you're passionate about. You're able to start to contribute to that. But I think generally for me, I'll tell you a personal experience. I actually built my own Watson conversation bot inside Facebook Messenger just as a side project because I wanted to know how it worked. And it was fascinating just going through and learning about how to build an intent. How are people going to ask this question? And I needed to build the model about here are the 10 different ways you could possibly ask the same question. And so just going through that process really educated me on like how we interact on our own, but also how we can teach others how we want to be communicated with. So I think that's a huge part of AI, and I think I actually really like to refer to it as augmented intelligence rather than artificial, because I think the main piece too is that we're just adding to things that we can do right now and augmenting our current experience to make it better. We don't want to have a detrimental experience, or we don't want to create a detrimental experience for anybody that we interact with. So we just need to be cognizant of the fact that all of the things that we're building and all of the models that we're adding to are all additive, but for a positive reason. So, yeah.
You know, with the artificial intelligence, my son goes to Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara, and he's a computer science major. And so I told him, artificial intelligence is the future. You need to get into artificial intelligence, you know, because he has to pick like some different segments of it. And he came back and says, okay, Dad, I went and asked my computer science professor, and he says, artificial intelligence already happened. UC system, we're supposed to work on things that are 10 years in the future. And I was kind of blown away. I'm like, okay, so to your question, it's already done. We need to find the next thing.
Yeah.
That's the second time you're dating yourself.
Yeah. The
So,
academics.
now, from the perspective of brands, I think all brands understand the importance of messaging, they want to embrace. So, at the same time, you have a number of challenges. So, what are the words of advice for brands in terms of how they should use the channel, how they should engage with customers over this channel? So, what have you learned? What are the pieces of advice that you could share?
Sure, I'll take that. So I think that the brands that we're working with, they think about messaging as this very personalized channel. So it is challenging to understand what is the context, what is the behavior, what are all the preferences that this consumer has, and then how do we communicate with them in a way that is individualized. You cannot batch and blast or treat a consumer as a segment in this channel. So that's the challenge that a lot of brands are currently working with. How do we adopt this new channel? How do we do it in a way that respects the user's expectations and advances your business goals?
Yeah, so I launched a program that automates the process of first call when you buy a phone. There used to be your sales rep would call up and say, welcome to our service, you've got a new phone. So I automated that process with a simple text message, and then I made it a two-way text message that had the store's telephone number that you could communicate with. And we ended up rolling that out to all the stores in the company, but before we rolled it out, we had to do a 30-store sample. We took 15 stores that didn't use it and 15 that did. And the results of this were like amazing. I mean, it was like, we measured it in 3 different ways. We measured it in the, how likely would you be to refer, us as a, in the future, and the 3-day retention. One thing that you want to do is have a sales rep sell a device and then not be taking it back to the store or calling customer care like right away. The sales rep has responsibility. And then overall customer satisfaction. It's called the Net Promoter Score is what we measured. And then also kind of the cost, of how much time it takes for a sales rep to go in the back room and send all these manual messages. And all those numbers were amazing. I mean, and it's statistically valid because you don't see any of these stores, an outlier that the 15 got the advantage. So based on that, it was rolled out to thousands of stores. So that's just one app. Every business in America should be using this. And I think that the one thing you got to learn too about this is, in my experience in working with messaging, is that messaging apps that don't allow customizations sometimes have problems. You know, what I've learned is everybody wants it differently. You know, we've done some research with, I've done some research with leading design companies, you know, on how to build, you know, apps and everything. We've done some research. And it came back that people are very passionate about, like, customizing their phone. You know, it used to be you want a different ringtone, everybody would buy ringtone. Now, you know, people have to have their pink app. You know, I saw one lady, I followed her around for her day, and she was so proud of how her messaging home screen looked with the pink screen, and, you know, she wanted different bubble colors and she wanted it customized. And, you know, that was a huge use case, and that's where I think a lot of people get tired of the standard messaging client, you know, that's just, it's the same thing every day. They want to see something different. They want to see something of themselves in it. And you have to open it up to developers. You got to let developers and create an ecosystem that allows people to create an experience that's their own, that they can call their own.
Yeah, I agree on the creating an experience of your own. So for us on the IoT side, we're really far removed from the experience of receiving a message on your phone or a notification on your app. And so I'll walk you through an example and just share some thoughts on how to measure and understand what the most important things in the path for you are. So we work with a number of these scooter companies. I'm sure some of you have seen the scooters out here on the streets in San Francisco. So a good example is Lime, which is one of our customers. And so they use our SIMs inside the scooter. The SIM talks to Twilio or talks out to the internet to our Twilio server. Twilio then kind of talks to their cloud services, and that cloud then talks to their app, and that app then talks to the person. But also you could serve them an SMS or any other kind of experience. And so like that Line team have so many legs in which they have to deliver an excellent experience, and they all have to make sure they work together and they work well so that the customer can have a seamless experience. And so the one thing that I would say as you start to extend out to these things, like we talked about the cards and the charging stations and all of these, there are so many more segments now involved from getting a communication from one place to another. And so when we think about the end user experience or the customer experience, there are also other elements of the experience, like how is it to develop against all of these segments? So do I have all of the documentation? Can I build against a really easy to use API? Like, are all of these things really, really seamless to interact with? Does that give then fundamentally a good experience to a user who's just opened the app and scanned a QR code and then they're jumping on a scooter? So, you know, like it's extremely complicated to deliver that seamless thing. So, yeah, ultimately it all comes down to what your customer experience looks like. But on our side, we think about things like just self-service and reliability and deliverability. All of these things, particularly in messaging, are really important. So some of our customers will choose to use a data path versus an SMS path just because deliverability in some areas is going to be better using data in a metropolitan area versus sometimes SMS doesn't always go through, the deliverability is not at 100%, right? So you have to make choices about what the experience is going to be for your customer and choose the right channel in that context. Yeah.
Cool.
How important for brands do you think it is to have messaging built into their apps, as opposed to just using independent channels like Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp or just SMS?
So one thing we found was today people have a web experience, which is their website, and then they have their app, right? And the people who are really prolific users of the product, you don't need to convince them to go download the app, right? Like over a period of time, if it's Amazon, if it is Uber, etc., they'll go download the app because that's where the best experience is available. But what we realize is the trade-off is you have a very loose experience. You don't have a lot of customer data on a web experience. and there's a huge jump to like go download an app and then have the best experience with a lot of customer data, like the location and the login information and a credit card and stuff like that. What we realized was there was the gap for like an in-between experience, which is it's an app that I already have. I don't have to go demonstrate any kind of commitment. So mentally, I don't have to make that jump yet, that I'm not committed to this brand or the service just yet. But still, I'd like to have a better experience than just searching on a search engine and like landing on a website and then going to a login page and then abandoning the experience. So I think, whether it is Messenger, whether it is Instagram, whether it's Snap, people are building experiences on those apps because more and more people have them and use them every day. And so it's a more integrated experience into what people are doing every day. And as a result, if I'm Chipotle, McDonald's, or whatever, I could offer up a bunch of people doing their task on an app that I already have. And what we find is that on a messaging app, people don't have a browsing behavior. If I'm on the web or if I'm on the Facebook app, I have sort of a browsing mindset. I have some time to kill and I'm browsing, and I don't have a general. I have a general goal. I don't have a specific goal. Whereas on messaging, people want to go in and say, "Are you here yet? I'm on my way. I need a cab." It's more of a task completion mindset. And so if you let them complete that task, right, getting an appointment at a store or looking up a bill or doing a transaction or what have you. And if you look at even other platforms like iMessage, it's also very transactional. Like you have Apple Pay integrated, etc. The only exception to that is if they want to be just more expressive, like they want to add an emoji to a word or instead of a word. Like that's the exception to the task completion mindset.
We have time for one or two additional questions from the audience.
Well, I guess.
You don't need to raise that hand. Take the floor.
Since it's OST.
Seize the floor.
Since it's OST, of course, I'm curious what your observations and thoughts are about message recall as a trend. Some of us are old enough to remember my best friend's wedding when Julia Roberts sent that message to her ex-boyfriend's boss and got him fired, and wanted to recall it immediately and couldn't through AOL. And that was, I think, where it all started about what was possible. But now we're this far ahead, and it's mass adoption. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are about the impact of recall.
Yeah, there's an article today about a wedding. I think somebody was out wedding shopping, and they sent, you guys can look it up, but
Yeah.
they sent the wrong message to a mother-in-law. So,
Oh.
I think I've done that before. We're on the cross-country team. I'm messaging with some of the kids, and then I get in the wrong thread, and I'm like, uh-oh, I'm on with this kid, and I'm like,
And of course,
never mind, skip that message,
It has
that goes out to the
levels
athlete.
of embarrassment, right? It's a boss
Yeah.
or a fiance or.
Exactly. So it could go. Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it could go to the wrong
Yeah.
thread, and usually you notice like right after when you hit send. I don't know why that is. It happens right after you hit send.
It's the
It
hindsight
happens.
bias.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's
Yeah.
the hindsight bias in play.
It is.
Hindsight's 20/20. So you
And if
can't
I just
do
take
right
that
after
back,
it goes.
yeah. And I think one thing you see with messaging is a majority of the messages are person to person. We've been talking about messaging as a platform, but it's still person to person is a majority. And yeah, I think it's an important function or feature for people.
I think there's also the difference between, as much as the emotionality of, oops, I just screwed up, I have to recall that message is much higher in the moment. There's also times when, let's say, a company has a culture of using a messaging app for intra-company communications.
Yes.
And let's say an employee leaves the firm, you may want to bulk recall all the messages to that employee. And today there's really like no way to do that. It might be like 400 messages over 3 years, but like how do you know which ones are those? And some might be one-on-one, some might be group messages. So I think like there is a value of that. And then there is the third part, which is also kind of message recall or message deletion from a group admin perspective. A lot of times if I get rid of a group member in a group, because I think a lot of messaging right now is like groups of 3, 4, 5. It's not groups of 800 people. There are some, but the most frequent groups are small groups. And so is there a possibility that when one person is removed from the group for saying something inappropriate or whatever, can you also remove their past messages? Because people don't want that, sitting in the group. But the admin now has the manual responsibility of like looking at who sent what message. So I think there's also, as groups become where communication is done, like you probably have a group for your cross-country person, and if someone got kicked out and another person got moved in, sometimes there's confidentiality around what the new person can know and see. So I think there's a lot of use cases around kind of message recall. I think obviously the most dramatic version is, oops, I sent the mother-in-law the wrong message, and it's like one single message.
Or your boss.
But I think, but I think there's a lot of use cases around.
Okay. Thank you.
How about when or if do you think we'll see something like WeChat in the States where you can do so many different services within the messaging app without having to go out to all these individual applications? Which you said, you don't necessarily want to download them to your phone and just pick up your memory and things. Do you think that ship has already sailed in the US and it's just too different of a market, or do you think something like that is coming down the road?
I think there's a lot of fragmentation right now in the US. Really, you got to get rid of some of that fragmentation to do that, because going back to the sports, in California we live in a kind of a multicultural, place, and there's some communities that use WhatsApp and there's some that use WeChat, and trying to get those communities to switch is almost impossible. If you try and get the Chinese and the Indian communities to say, if you have a soccer team with different people on it, and you say to the Indian person, download WeChat, and you go to they just won't do it. So it's like a big kind of struggle of, let's use my product, let's use your product. I'm not downloading WeChat, we don't use that product. And so I think until a lot of that is kind of worked out, and I know the carriers have a lot of fragmentation with RCS. RCS has been launched for many years, but you haven't seen a lot of interoperability in the US, because there's a lot of fragmentation even in the feature sets in RCS. But this creates a lot of opportunities, for developers to figure out how to bridge those gaps and get rid of that fragmentation.
Perhaps to be a dashboard. At some point, somebody's coming up with a dashboard that integrates all of them, right?
That would, if it was done in the right way, I think that
Yeah.
would be helpful, because you pick an application or a service doesn't mean that I have to. And the minute I want to use one of these plugins and it doesn't work with somebody in my community, I'm going to think your plugin is broken. It's got to work 100% of the time.
I'm afraid we're reaching the end of our panel, but I tend to think that the panel is a more conversation starter than the end of things. So we'll have a little bit of time to continue conversations with Vanessa in smaller group. But before we do that, I'd like you to join me in giving a round of applause to